The space station Harmony Junction floated silently between the stars. It was a massive structure built from both human and alien technology. The station served as neutral ground where different species could meet safely. Today, it would host the most important meeting in recent history. The humans and the Zolonians were finally going to talk about peace. Princess Lyra stood in her private quarters aboard the Zolonian diplomatic ship. She looked at herself in the mirror one last time. Her pale blue skin had a soft glow under the ship's lights. The crystal formations along her temples caught the light and sparkled gently. She wore the formal robes of her royal house. The fabric was woven with threads that changed color as she moved. Everything about her appearance was perfect. It had to be. She had trained for this moment her entire life. A Zolonian princess must never show weakness. She must never let emotions control her actions. Her people valued control above all else. They believed that a clear mind was the strongest weapon anyone could have. Lyra had mastered every lesson about composure and dignity. She knew exactly how to stand, how to speak, and how to keep her face calm no matter what happened. The transport shuttle carried her from the diplomatic ship to the space station. She sat with her back straight and her hands folded in her lap. Her advisors sat around her reviewing the meeting plans one more time. Ambassador Kale reminded her about the proper greeting gestures. Cultural expert Nira warned her about human customs that might seem strange or rude. They all spoke in whispers because loud voices were considered improper. The shuttle docked with a soft bump. Lyra rose gracefully from her seat. She walked to the airlock with measured steps. Each movement was practiced and controlled. The airlock opened with a hiss of equalizing air pressure. The smell of the human space station hit her immediately. It was different from Zolonian ships. It smelled of metal and something else she could not identify. Something warm and organic. The reception hall was larger than she expected. Humans and other species moved around the space, preparing for the ceremony. She noticed how loudly they spoke to each other. Some of them were actually laughing. On her homeworld, such behavior in a formal setting would be scandalous. She kept her expression neutral despite her surprise. A human officer approached their group. He was tall with broad shoulders and dark hair cut very short. He wore a military uniform with several medals pinned to his chest. His face was weathered and had small scars that suggested he had seen combat. This was clearly a soldier, not a diplomat. "Your Highness," the human said with a slight bow. "I'm Sergeant Jake Collins. I've been assigned as your escort and security." Detailed during the negotiations, Lyra studied him carefully. His movements were efficient, but not graceful, like the courtiers she was used to. His voice was deeper than most Zolonian males. When he spoke, she could see that his teeth were very white and straight. His eyes were brown like the bark of trees on her homeworld. But there was something in those eyes that caught her attention. They looked kind, but also alert, as if he was always ready for danger. "Sergeant Collins," she replied with a formal nod. Her voice carried the musical quality that all Zolonians possessed. "I appreciate your service in this matter." Jake stepped forward and extended his right hand toward her. "It's good to meet you, Princess." Lyra stared at his outstretched hand. She had studied human customs, but seeing it in person was different. His hand was much larger than hers would be. The skin looked rough and was darker than her pale blue fingers. She could see calluses on his palm and knuckles. This was clearly a hand that had held weapons and worked with tools. In Zolonian culture, touching someone you just met was extremely personal. Only family members or very close friends ever made physical contact. The proper greeting between strangers was a formal bow with hands pressed together. But she was here to build bridges between their peoples. She had to show respect for human ways, even if they made her uncomfortable. Slowly, she reached out and placed her hand in his. The moment their skin touched, something unexpected happened. His hand was warm, much warmer than she had imagined. The heat seemed to travel up her arm and spread through her body. Her people had cold blood compared to humans. She had known this fact from her studies, but feeling it was completely different. But it was more than just the temperature. There was something else, something she could not name. Her telepathic senses, which usually picked up only the faintest emotions from other Zalonians, suddenly felt overwhelmed. She could sense something from this human that she had never experienced before. It was not exactly thoughts or feelings, but some kind of energy that made her heart beat faster. Jake shook her hand gently but firmly. His grip was strong but careful, as if he was afraid of hurting her. "I hope your stay here goes well, Princess. If you need anything at all, just let me know." Lyra tried to speak, but found her voice had become unsteady. She quickly pulled her hand back and clasped both hands behind her back. She hoped no one had noticed the slight tremor in her fingers. "Thank you, Sergeant. I am certain everything will proceed smoothly." Her aide Nira stepped closer, perhaps sensing that something was wrong. Ambassador Kale began discussing the schedule for the day, but Lyra found it hard to focus on their words. She kept thinking about the warmth of Jake's hand and the strange sensation it had caused. This was not supposed to happen. She was trained to handle any situation with perfect composure. Yet this simple human greeting had shaken her more than she cared to admit. As they walked through the station toward the first meeting, Lyra worked to regain her emotional balance. She breathed slowly and evenly. She reminded herself of her training and her duty. But whenever she glanced at Jake walking beside her, she felt that strange warmth again. Something about this human soldier was different from anything she had prepared for, and that terrified her more than any diplomatic challenge ever could. The next morning brought new challenges for Princess Lyra. She had barely slept during the night cycle. Every time she closed her eyes, she remembered the feeling of Jake's warm hand in hers. She had tried meditation techniques that usually helped her find inner peace. Nothing worked. Her mind kept returning to those brown eyes and that strange energy she had felt from him. She dressed carefully in a different set of formal robes. These were deep purple with silver threading. The outfit was designed to project authority and wisdom. She needed to feel in control today. The morning's schedule included a tour of the space station before the afternoon negotiations began. Jake would be with her the entire time. When she met him in the corridor outside her quarters, he looked different. He wore a clean uniform, but it was less formal than yesterday. She noticed he moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in their own skin. Zalonian nobles were taught to move with rigid precision. Jake's movements were fluid and natural. "Good morning, Princess," he said with a smile. "Ready for the grand tour?" "I am prepared," she replied, though she was not sure that was true. Their first stop was the central marketplace. Lyra had never seen anything like it. Humans from different colonies mixed with traders from various alien species. The noise level was shocking. People called out prices for their goods. Children ran between the stalls playing games. Someone was cooking food that filled the air with unfamiliar but pleasant smells. "This is our main trading hub," Jake explained as they walked. "People come here from all over this sector of space. It gets pretty crazy sometimes, but that's what makes it fun." Lyra watched a human merchant arguing loudly with a customer about the price of some electronic device. Both of them were gesturing wildly with their hands. Their voices grew louder and louder. She tensed, expecting the disagreement to turn violent. In Zalonian society, such public displays of emotion often led to formal duels. But then something amazing happened. The merchant suddenly laughed and slapped the customer on the back. They shook hands and completed the sale as if nothing had happened. The customer even smiled as he walked away with his purchase. Were they not angry with each other? Lyra asked. Jake chuckled. That's just how old Bill negotiates. He and that customer go through the same routine every month. They both enjoy it. It's like a game to them. This confused Lyra deeply. On her homeworld, business was conducted with quiet dignity. Prices were set and paid without discussion. The idea that people could argue loudly and then laugh about it was completely foreign to her. They moved on to the recreation areas. Here, humans played various games and sports. Some threw balls at targets, while others engaged in friendly wrestling matches. Lyra watched a group of young adults playing some kind of team sport that involved a lot of running and shouting. They seemed to be having a wonderful time, despite sweating heavily and breathing hard. Don't your people worry about maintaining proper dignity? She asked Jake. He looked at her with curiosity. What do you mean? All this loudness and physical exertion. In public. On my world, such behavior would be considered inappropriate for adults. Jake stopped walking and turned to face her fully. Princess, can I ask you something? She nodded, though she felt nervous about what he might say. Do you ever just have fun? Like, do things just because they make you happy? The question hit her like a physical blow. She opened her mouth to answer, but no words came out. She had been trained in music, art, literature, diplomacy, and warfare. She had mastered meditation, mental discipline, and emotional control. But fun? Happiness for its own sake? These concepts seemed almost alien to her. I find satisfaction in fulfilling my duties well, she finally managed. Jake's expression grew sad. That's not the same thing, is it? Before she could respond, they were interrupted by a commotion nearby. A group of human soldiers had gathered around a small table. They were being very loud, but not in an angry way. Lyra could hear laughter, mixed with what sounded like friendly insults. What are they doing? She asked. Playing cards, Jake replied. Want to watch? They approached the group. Lyra saw that the soldiers were indeed playing some kind of game with small decorated pieces of paper. But what fascinated her was how they interacted with each other. They joked constantly. They made fun of each other's mistakes, but in a way that seemed affectionate rather than cruel. When one soldier won a hand, the others groaned dramatically, but immediately dealt another round. One of the soldiers noticed Jake and called out, "Hey, Collins, want to join the next game?" "Maybe later, Pete. I'm giving the princess here a tour of our humble station." The soldier named Pete immediately straightened up and tried to look more formal. "Sorry, Your Highness. Didn't mean to be disrespectful." "You were not disrespectful," Lyra said. "I am simply observing your customs." "Well, if you ever want to learn poker, we'd be happy to teach you," Pete said with a grin. "Fair warning, though, Jake here is terrible at bluffing. His face gives everything away." Jake laughed, and the other soldiers joined in. Lyra watched this interaction with growing amazement. These humans showed affection through teasing. They found joy in simple games. They laughed easily and often. Yet they were also disciplined soldiers who would fight and die for their people if necessary. Later, they visited the observation deck. Through the massive windows, Lyra could see the stars stretching out into infinity. Earth was visible as a small blue dot in the distance. Jake stood beside her looking out at the view. "Do you miss your homeworld when you're out here?" she asked. "Sometimes," he replied. "But space has its own beauty, and there's something about seeing everything from this perspective that makes you realize how connected we all are." Lyra looked at his profile as he spoke. There was something peaceful about his expression when he looked at the stars. She found herself wondering what thoughts went through his mind. What dreams did he have? What made him laugh when he was alone? These were dangerous thoughts for a Zilonian princess. She was not supposed to be curious about individuals from other species, beyond what was necessary for diplomacy. But Jake was different from what she had expected humans to be. He was not crude or primitive, as some of her people believed. He was thoughtful and kind. He showed genuine interest in her comfort and well-being. As the day continued, Lyra found herself paying less attention to the sights Jake showed her and more attention to Jake himself. She noticed how he always positioned himself between her and any potential threats. She saw how other humans responded to him with respect and friendship. She observed the way he spoke to everyone from high-ranking officers to maintenance workers with the same basic courtesy. By evening, as they returned to the diplomatic quarters, Lyra realized something troubling. She was beginning to care what Jake thought about her. She wanted him to see her as more than just another alien dignitary. This was not supposed to happen. She was here to represent her people, not to form personal attachments. But as she said goodnight to him outside her quarters, she found herself hoping tomorrow would bring more opportunities to learn about this fascinating human soldier. And that realization scared her more than any diplomatic crisis ever could. The formal dinner was supposed to be a celebration of diplomatic progress. Representatives from both species sat at a long table in the station's main conference hall. The lighting was soft, and the atmosphere was meant to be peaceful. Lyra wore her finest ceremonial robes, ones that had been in her family for generations. The fabric seemed to glow with its own inner light. Jake sat several seats away from her at the table. He wore his dress uniform with all his military decorations. Lyra found herself glancing at him more often than she should. Every time their eyes met across the table, she felt that strange warmth spread through her chest. She worked hard to keep her expression neutral, but it was becoming more difficult each time. The meal progressed through several courses. Human and Zilonian foods were served side by side so both species could eat comfortably. Lyra picked at her food, finding it hard to concentrate on eating. The conversation around the table was polite but formal. Diplomats from both sides discussed trade agreements and border security in careful, measured tones. Then someone asked Jake about his military service. Lyra noticed how he became more serious when the subject changed to combat. His easy smile faded, and his voice took on a different quality. "I served in the border conflicts before these peace talks began," he said simply. "It was necessary work, but I'm glad we're here talking instead of fighting." Ambassador Kale pressed for more details. What was it like facing Zilonian forces? In battle? Jake was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. "War is war, sir. People die on both sides. I lost good friends out there. Young men and women who should have had long lives ahead of them. That's why these negotiations matter so much." Lyra felt something shift inside her chest. She had expected him to boast about victories or speak with hatred about Zilonian warriors. Instead, he showed genuine sadness about the entire conflict. In her culture, warriors were taught to accept death as part of duty. They were not supposed to grieve openly for fallen comrades. "You speak of your dead with great emotion," observed one of her advisors. "Is this typical for human soldiers?" "We remember them," Jake replied. "Every single one. We tell stories about them so they're not forgotten. We carry their memory with us because forgetting would dishonor their sacrifice." The Zilonian advisor looked puzzled. "But does such emotional attachment not interfere with your ability to fight effectively?" Jake's brown eyes grew intense. "No, sir. It makes us fight harder. When you know you're fighting for people you care about, for friends who trusted you, to come home safe, it gives you strength you didn't know you had." Lyra stared at Jake in amazement. Everything she had been taught about emotional control suddenly seemed wrong. Her people believed that feelings made warriors weak. But Jake spoke about love and loss as sources of strength. How could two species see the same thing so differently? The dinner continued, but Lyra barely heard the conversations around her. She kept thinking about Jake's words. She tried to imagine what it would feel like to care so deeply about someone that losing them would cause genuine pain. Zelonians formed partnerships and had families, but always with careful emotional distance. Love was a pleasant feeling, but never something that controlled important decisions. After the meal, there was a cultural exchange presentation. Human musicians played songs, while Zelonian artists demonstrated crystal singing. The music was beautiful, but Lyra found it hard to focus. She kept watching Jake's reactions to the performances. She noticed how his face lit up during an upbeat human song. She saw him lean forward with interest during a particularly complex Zelonian harmony. When the formal evening ended, most of the diplomats retired to their quarters. Lyra claimed she needed fresh air and walked to one of the station's observation lounges. She was not surprised when Jake followed her. It was his job to ensure her safety, after all. The lounge was empty at this hour. Through the large windows, she could see her people's home star system in the distance. It looked so small from here. She pressed one hand against the cool glass and tried to calm her racing thoughts. "Princess, are you all right?" Jake asked. "You seemed distracted during dinner." She turned to face him. They were alone for the first time since that day in the marketplace. Without the crowd of diplomats and advisors around them, the space felt intimate. She could see concern in his brown eyes. "May I ask you something, Sergeant?" "Of course." "Why do humans allow yourselves to feel so deeply when it causes such obvious pain?" Jake moved closer to the window. He stood beside her, but not touching. "That's a hard question to answer. I guess because the good feelings are worth the risk of bad ones. When you care about someone, really care about them, it makes everything brighter. Food tastes better. Sunsets are more beautiful. Even ordinary moments become special. But what about the pain when you lose them? The pain proves that what you had was real and valuable. If losing someone didn't hurt, then having them wouldn't have mattered much, would it?" Lyra considered. My people believe that emotional attachment clouds judgment. We are taught that clear thinking requires distance from such feelings." "Maybe," Jake said. "But what's the point of clear thinking if you're not thinking about things that matter to you?" She looked at him in surprise. "You question the wisdom of emotional control?" "I question whether control is always wisdom. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let yourself feel something, even if it scares you." His words hit her like a lightning bolt. She had spent her entire life learning to control every emotion, every reaction, every impulse. She had believed this made her strong and worthy of respect. But what if she had been limiting herself instead? What if there were kinds of strength she had never explored? "Are you not afraid of being vulnerable?" she asked. Jake smiled, and the expression transformed his entire face. "Terrified? But I've learned that some things are worth being scared about." Lyra felt her heart beating faster. The way he looked at her when he said those words made her wonder if he was talking about more than philosophy. She realized she was, staring into his eyes, and quickly looked away. "I should return to my quarters," she said. "Tomorrow will be a busy day of negotiations." "Of course, Princess. I'll escort you back." As they walked through the quiet corridors, Lyra's mind raced. Every conversation with Jake challenged something she thought she knew about herself. He made her question not just her people's customs, but her own identity. She was supposed to be a perfect Zelonian princess, controlled and dignified at all times. But around Jake, she felt like a different person trying to break free. When they reached her quarters, she turned to thank him for the evening. The words died in her throat when she saw how he was looking at her. There was something in his expression that made her stomach flutter in a way she had never experienced before. "Good night, Princess Lyra," he said softly. "Good night, Jake," she replied, using his first name without thinking. Only after her door closed did she realize what she had done. She had called him by his personal name, not his rank. It was a small thing, but it felt significant. She leaned against the door and pressed her hands to her chest, trying to calm her rapid heartbeat. Something was happening to her, something she did not understand. All her training in emotional control seemed useless against whatever Jake made her feel. And the most frightening part was that she was not sure she wanted to fight it anymore. The emergency alarm shattered the peaceful quiet of the space station. Red lights flashed in the corridors as automated voices announced a security breach. Lyra had been in her quarters reviewing negotiation documents when the chaos began. The sound of explosions echoed through the station's hall, making the walls vibrate. Her door burst open, and Jake rushed inside. His face was grim, and he carried his weapon ready for action. Behind him came two other human security officers. "Princess, we need to move now," he said urgently. "Extremist groups have attacked the station. They're trying to stop the peace talks." Lyra rose from her chair with practiced calm, though her heart was racing. "How many attackers are there?" "Unknown. They've taken control of several sections. We're evacuating all diplomatic personnel to secure areas." Jake led her quickly through corridors she had never seen before. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows on the walls. They could hear distant gunfire and more explosions. Other people ran past them, some crying, others shouting orders. The station that had seemed so safe and peaceful now felt like a war zone. They reached a heavily armored door, marked as an emergency shelter. Jake pressed his hand to a scanner, and the door slid open. Inside was a small room with thick walls and basic life support systems. Several other diplomats were already there, including some of her own people. "You'll be safe here," Jake told her. "The walls are reinforced, and the door can only be opened from inside or with special security." Codes. Lyra noticed he was not coming inside with them. "Where are you going?" "I need to help coordinate the defense. Other security teams are spread thin, and they need every available person." "But your assignment is to protect me," she said, hating. How desperate her voice sounded. Jake paused in the doorway. For a moment, his professional mask slipped, and she saw genuine concern in his eyes. Not just the concern of a guard for his charge, but something deeper and more personal. "You're safe. Here, I promise I'll come back for you when this is over." The door sealed shut with a heavy thud. Lyra pressed her hands against the metal surface, suddenly feeling more trapped than protected. Around her, the other diplomats spoke in worried whispers. Some were crying. Others paced nervously around the small space. Ambassador Kale approached. "Your Highness, are you injured?" "I am unharmed," she replied automatically. But that was not entirely true. She felt strange, like something inside her chest was being pulled tight. The thought of Jake out there facing danger made her feel sick with worry. Hours passed slowly. The emergency lighting in the shelter cast everything in a dim red glow. They could hear muffled sounds from outside, but could not tell what was happening. The air recycling system hummed constantly. Someone had found emergency rations and water supplies, but Lyra could not eat anything. She kept thinking about Jake. Was he safe? Was he hurt? The not knowing was torture, unlike anything she had ever experienced. She had been trained to handle diplomatic crisis, political pressure, even the possibility of assassination attempts. But no one had prepared her for this crushing anxiety about another person's welfare. "Princess," said one of her advisors, "you seem distressed. Perhaps meditation would help calm your mind." She tried the breathing exercises she had learned as a child. She attempted to clear her thoughts and find her center of balance. Nothing worked. Every technique for emotional control failed her when she most needed them. All she could think about was Jake's promise to return, and whether he would be able to keep it. After what felt like an eternity, they heard sounds outside the door. Heavy footsteps and muffled voices. Everyone in the shelter grew quiet and tense. Then came the sound of the security scanner being activated. The door opened and Jake stepped inside. He was dirty and looked exhausted, but he was alive and uninjured. Lyra felt such a rush of relief that her knees nearly buckled. She wanted to run to him, to touch him, and make sure he was really there and really safe. Instead, she stood frozen, in place, fighting to maintain proper royal composure. "The station is secure," Jake announced to everyone. "The attackers have been captured or driven off. It's safe to return to your quarters." The other diplomats began filing out of the shelter, eager to leave the cramped space. Lyra waited until most of them had gone before approaching Jake. She needed to speak with him alone, though she was not sure what she wanted to say. "Are you hurt?" she asked when they were finally alone in the corridor. "Just some bruises. Nothing serious." He studied her face carefully. "What about you? You look pale." She almost laughed at the irony. Her people were naturally pale, but he was right that she probably looked worse than usual. "I was concerned about your safety." The words came out. Before she could stop them, she immediately regretted the admission. A proper Zelonian princess should not express personal worry about a human soldier's welfare. Such feelings were inappropriate and undignified. But Jake's expression softened when she spoke. "You were worried about me? It would be unfortunate if harm came to someone under my protection," she said quickly, trying to make it sound like diplomatic concern rather than personal feeling. Jake stepped closer to her. They were alone in the corridor, and his voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Princess, can I tell you something?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "When I was out there fighting, all I could think about was getting back to make sure you were safe. Not because it's my job, but because the thought of something happening to you scared me more than anything I've ever faced in combat." Lyra stared at him in shock. He had just confessed to caring about her as a person, not just as a diplomatic assignment. Everything she had been taught said she should discourage such inappropriate feelings. She should remind him of the vast social distance between them and redirect his emotions toward more proper channels. Instead, she found herself saying, "I felt the same way about you." The admission hung in the air between them, like a bridge neither of them was sure they should cross. Jake's brown eyes searched her face as if trying to understand what she meant. Lyra felt exposed and vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with the recent attack. "Princess," he began, but then stopped himself. "Lyra, I don't know what's happening here, but I need you to know that you've changed something in me. I've never met anyone like you." "Nor I you," she whispered. They stood there looking at each other in the dim corridor lighting. Lyra felt as if she was standing at the edge of a cliff, about to jump into unknown territory. Every instinct told her to step back, to restore proper distance, to remember her duty and position. But Jake's words about courage echoed in her mind. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let yourself feel something, even if it scares you. Before she could lose her nerve, she reached out and touched his hand. The same warm sensation spread up her arm that she had felt during their first handshake. But this time, she did not pull away. This time, she let herself feel the connection between them without trying to control or analyze it. Jake gently squeezed her hand. "We should probably get you back to your quarters. Tomorrow's going to be a difficult day with all this chaos." She nodded, but made no move to let go of his hand. They walked slowly through the station corridors, neither speaking, but both knowing that something fundamental had changed between them. Whatever was growing between them was dangerous and complicated and probably impossible. But after tonight, Lyra was no longer sure she had the strength to fight it. And more frightening still, she was no longer sure she wanted to. The final day of negotiations arrived with unexpected complications. Lyra woke to find her personal guard informing her that the Emperor himself had arrived during the night. Her father had come to personally oversee the conclusion of the peace talks. This changed everything. Emperor Thane was not just her father. He was the absolute ruler of the Zalonian Empire. His presence meant the negotiations had reached the highest levels of importance. It also meant that every aspect of Lyra's behavior would be scrutinized with impossible standards. Any sign of improper conduct could damage not just her reputation, but the entire peace process. She dressed in her most formal robes, ones reserved for the most important state occasions. The fabric was pure white, with gold threading that formed the ancient symbols of her royal house. The crystal formations in her hair were arranged in the traditional pattern that signified unwavering duty to the empire. Looking at herself in the mirror, she appeared to be the perfect Zalonian princess. But inside, she felt like she was wearing a costume. The emperor waited for her in the diplomatic suite. He was tall even by Zalonian standards, with silver-blue skin that seemed to glow with inner light. His robes were more elaborate than hers, marking him as the supreme authority of their people. When he looked at her, his eyes were sharp and calculating. "My daughter," he said in the formal tone he used for official business. "I trust your time here has been productive for our people's interests." "Yes, father. The negotiations have proceeded well. Both sides appear committed to reaching agreement." "Excellent. I have reviewed the proposed treaty terms and find them acceptable. Today, we will finalize these accords and begin a new era of peace between our species." As they walked to the main conference room, the Emperor asked detailed questions about her observations of human culture and military capabilities. Lyra answered carefully, providing useful information while avoiding any mention of her personal interactions with Jake. She hoped her father would not notice how her voice changed slightly when she spoke about human emotional customs. The conference room was more crowded than usual. High-ranking officials from both governments had arrived for the final signing ceremony. Media representatives prepared to record this historic moment. Lyra took her assigned seat at the main table, maintaining perfect posture and a serene expression. Jake was there as part of the security detail, but he stood near the back of the room with the other guards. When their eyes met briefly across the crowded space, Lyra felt that familiar flutter in her chest. She quickly looked away, focusing on the documents being presented for review. The negotiations proceeded smoothly. Both sides had already agreed on the major points during the previous days. Now is simply a matter of formalizing the language and preparing for the signing ceremony. Lyra participated in the discussions with her usual diplomatic skill, but part of her attention kept drifting to Jake's presence in the room. During a brief recess, the Emperor drew her aside for a private conversation. They stepped into a smaller room adjacent to the main conference hall. The Emperor's expression was serious as he studied her face. "Daughter, I have observed something troubling during my time here." Lyra's heart began to race, but she kept her voice steady. "What concerns you, father?" "Your interactions with the human soldier assigned as your escort. There appears to be an inappropriate level of familiarity between you. Sergeant Collins has performed his duties professionally. I have shown him the courtesy appropriate for someone serving in his capacity." The Emperor's eyes narrowed slightly. "I am not questioning his performance. I am questioning yours. Several of our people have mentioned that you seem unusually interested in this particular human." Lyra felt trapped. Lying to her father was unthinkable, but telling the truth would be disastrous. "I have found human customs fascinating from an anthropological perspective. Understanding their culture serves our diplomatic interests. Perhaps, but personal fascination can cloud judgment. I am reassigning guard duties to ensure there are no further concerns about improper attachments. The words hit her like a physical blow. She would not see Jake again after today. Once the ceremony concluded, she would return to the homeworld and resume her normal life. The thought of never speaking with him again made her feel hollow inside. Is that wise, Father? Changing security arrangements at such a critical moment could create confusion. The decision is made, the Emperor said firmly. A princess of our house must be above reproach. Personal feelings, if they exist, must never interfere with duty. They returned to the conference room for the final session. Lyra took her seat and tried to focus on the proceedings, but her mind kept racing. In just a few hours, she would walk away from Jake forever. The peace treaty would be signed, and their peoples would begin a new relationship, but she would lose the most important personal connection she had ever made. The signing ceremony was elaborate and formal. Representatives from both governments spoke about the historic significance of the moment. Cameras recorded every detail for posterity. When it came time for the actual signing, Lyra added her name to the treaty with steady hands despite the turmoil in her heart. After the ceremony, there was a reception where officials from both sides could meet informally and celebrate the achievement. Lyra moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and making polite conversation. But all she could think about was finding a way to say goodbye to Jake. She finally spotted him near the exit, preparing to leave with the other security personnel. This was her last chance. Making a decision that would have shocked her former self, she excused herself from a conversation with a human admiral and walked directly toward Jake. "Sergeant Collins," she said when she reached him, "might I have a word with you privately?" Jake looked surprised, but nodded. They stepped into an empty corridor away from the reception noise. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Lyra struggled to find words for what she wanted to say. "I wanted to thank you for your service during these negotiations," she began formally. "It was an honor, Princess. I hope the treaty brings lasting peace between our peoples." This polite exchange was not what she had come to say. Looking at his face, she realized this might be the last time she would ever see those kind brown eyes or hear his voice. The thought gave her courage she did not know she possessed. "Jake," she said, using his first name deliberately, "I need you to know that knowing you has changed me. You showed me there are different kinds of strength than what I was taught. You helped me understand that sometimes the most courageous thing is to allow yourself to care about someone, even when it's complicated." Jake's expression grew serious. "Lyra, you've changed me too. You've shown me that grace and strength can exist together, that someone can be both gentle and incredibly brave. My father is reassigning your duties. After today, we will not see each other again. I know. I was told this morning." They stood there looking at each other, both knowing this was goodbye, but neither wanting to say the word. Finally, Lyra made a decision that would have horrified her diplomatic trainers. "I want you to know that if circumstances were different, if I were not who I am and you are not who you are, I would choose to know you better, much better." Jake stepped closer to her, "And I would choose the same thing. In any other life, in any other situation, I would want to see where this connection between us could lead. But we are who we are," Lyra said softly, "and we have duties that matter more than our personal feelings." Jake agreed. It was the truth, but it felt like a knife twisting in her chest. They both understood that duty came first. The peace between their peoples was more important than whatever was growing between them. But understanding something and accepting it were very different things. "Will you do something for me?" Lyra asked. "Anything. When you look up at the stars and see my homeworld sun in the distance, remember that someone thinks you are remarkable. Remember that you taught an alien princess that there is more than one way to be strong." Jake smiled, though his eyes looked sad. And when you look up at Earth's star from your world, remember that somewhere there's a human soldier who thinks you're the bravest person he's ever met. Remember that you showed him what real nobility looks like. They parted without touching, without any dramatic gestures that might be seen by others. Lyra returned to the reception, and Jake left with his security team. To outside observers, it was a perfectly proper farewell between a princess and a guard. But as Lyra stood in her quarters later that night, looking out at the stars through the transport ship's viewport, she knew that something fundamental had changed inside her. She had learned to care deeply about another person, despite every lesson about emotional control. She had experienced the pain and joy that came with genuine connection. She was returning home as a different person than the one who had left. She was still a princess with duties and responsibilities, but now she also understood what Jake had tried to teach her about the courage required for authentic feeling. And somewhere across the space between their worlds, she knew he was looking up at the same stars and remembering their brief but profound connection. The peace treaty would bring their peoples together, but the memory of what they had shared would always belong to them alone. It was not the ending either of T.